guys heard of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross? Very, very famous, very famous. She, in the 1960s, I think it was in Europe, I'm not sure, but she was working with, she was a psychologist, and she was working with people who were experiencing grief and loss. And so she created this grief theory that was picked up because there was nothing before that, and everybody jumped on it and said there are actually 5 stages of grief. Okay? The first one's denial, and then anger, and then bargaining, right? So, hey God, if you do this, I'll do this, kind of thing, try to make an agreement with someone. Depression, and then acceptance. And so this sort of took off as the, oh, let's go through these stages, okay? So Grandpa died, and so yeah, she's denying it at first for about 2 weeks, and then she's mad, and then she's like bargaining, and then she'll be a little bit sad, and then pretty soon she'll wake up one day and she'll have accepted it, and then everything moves on, okay? Well, the flaw, not so much with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work, but the flaw was what society did with her theory, because she was studying people who had gotten a terminal diagnosis. She didn't study the people who survived after they died. She was studying the people who actually had the diagnosis of a terminal disease. And people thought, well, if that's how they must be feeling, because they know they're losing their life and preparing for that, then the people who survive will probably be sad, and they'll go through the same thing. And so this kind of became the unspoken rule. And if you do any studying of grief or loss, you're going to find Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's name mentioned. Until a few years ago, when a gentleman started to do a lot of work named Robert Niemeyer. And I think he's in Tennessee. And he was looking at grief. And he created a new theory called the meaning reconstruction theory instead of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's theory. And
what was the name of the theory again? I'm sorry.
Meaning reconstruction theory. Yeah. So I think I have a comparison here, which is probably the best thing to do. So in Ross's traditional theory, she views death or loss as just an objective reality. It's something that happened, this is the way it is. Whereas Niemeyer says it's more of a personal reality. It's more about, you can't objectively stand back and look at it. It's really something that's more personal to you. Okay. Ross's theory says that you'll go through these universal stages. And that if you're normal, having a normal grief, you're going to go through these stages, these 5 stages. Whereas Niemeyer says that every response is different. There's an individual response to grief. Okay? Ross's theory casts the griever in a passive role. I'm just going to let it happen to me. Okay? I'm just going to let all these things happen to me. Whereas Niemeyer's says that you can be actively engaged in your own grief. There are things that you can do. Okay? You don't just have to sit back and wait for the sadness to come. You don't have to sit back and wait for the anger to come. You don't have to wait for the day when you're going to wake up and accept it. But you can actually have an active role in how you grieve. Ross's theory is prescriptive and talks about what's normal and abnormal, whereas Niemeyer talks about it opening it up and letting different people identify how they want to respond to it. Ross wants you to get back to your new normal, that acceptance place, where then you'll be normal again. And Niemeyer says, what has to happen is you have to actively create what's called a new normal. And I don't know if you've heard that term before, a new normal. Okay. And so he says that you can do that by reconstructing your relationship with that person. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So what shapes our grief and mourning? Culture does, language. If you want to know how a culture responds to grief, that's look at their language. Okay, because I doubt that any of you would ever have come into my office and said, "Oh, did your son die?" You never would have said that, okay? But you might come in, and if you were really curious and you'd heard that there was something in my office about my son, you might come in and say, "Did your son pass away?" Or, you know, we don't even want to say die. We say, you know, pass away or crossed over or moved on. What?
Gone.
Gone, yeah. You know what's really great is to read the obituaries. I know it sounds like a horrible thing to do, doesn't it? But, you know, you can really tell a lot about the family who's left by what they say. They won't say that, you know, Bill died. You know, he went to be with Jesus. Or he went to a better place, you know. And my mom would say to you, there's no better place than Grandma's kitchen. You know, that's what my mom would say. And, you know, so we do this, all these euphemisms kind of thing. What I had trouble with Greg dying is if your parents die, you are what? If your parents die, you're an orphan. If your wife dies, you're a widower. If your husband dies, you're a widow. If your child dies, you're a nothing. We do not even have a word for it in our culture.
Do other cultures?
Some cultures do. Yes. Yeah. And we don't want to have a word for it because it's such an awful, awful thing to imagine that we don't even want to put a label on it. And that's kind of, it's very telling sometimes what language does. Cultural rules we have, gender. There's a lot of research on how men grieve. I think the time is changing. I think older men, because of the kind of, I don't want to say restrictions that they had in their lives, but certainly the cultural norms and cultural expectations that they had, they grieved in a different way than women did. You know, that whole thing, guys don't let them see you cry, you know. I saw my dad cry, I think, during Greg's funeral. I'm not 100% sure. I was so out of it, I don't remember a whole lot that happened that day. I do remember, I only remember as a child my dad crying twice. Now he's an old Italian guy, he's like 86, you know, and we never saw him crying. I saw him cry once, well actually twice, when we got the call that my grandma had died, and when we got the call that the priest in our community had died. He cried those 2 times, just like little tears, not much. But as he's gotten older, he's a little bit better. He cried a lot when my brother died, so that was, I've seen him cry a lot more. So gender, there's a lot of research with how men grieve. Ethnicity, how different cultural kinds of things are happening. Age, you know, younger people, older people, what do you tell little kids? That kind of thing. Family, religion, those things all shape our grief and mourning. Oh, we can talk a lot about men. Okay. So, I guess what I like to get down to is, so if you know that someone has died and you want to say to them, or they're experiencing any kind of a loss, if you want to say to them, how can I help them? You know, what can I say? I gotta tell you, I had one girlfriend who, I couldn't believe she said this, okay, when my son died. So I call her up, And this is like maybe, let's see, we found out about 2 o'clock. It might have been around 6 o'clock or 8 o'clock that evening when I called my one girlfriend and I told her that Greg had died. And, okay, so when Greg was a teenager, like 14 through 18, you know what a wonderfully bonding time that is between mother and child, right? And we certainly had our issues, you know. I mean, he ran away from home one time because he was pissed off at me, and I locked him in his room one time. Well, I didn't lock him in his room, but you know. I mean, so you know, and we had shared a lot of all of these growing pains that you know, moms and kids have. And so when I called her to tell her, she was like, oh my gosh, I'm really sorry. But at least now you won't have to worry about him not getting along with you anymore. And I know you guys want to suck the air out of the room and go, are you kidding me? And I listened to her like, what? But I knew she didn't mean it. I knew that she couldn't think of anything else to say. So she was trying to go somewhere with something that seemed somehow positive to her, okay? And about 5 years, I never said anything to her about it, and about 5 years later she said, can I talk to you about something? And I said, yeah. And she said, I have to tell you that I really need to apologize to you for something I said. And I said, what do you mean? And I thought that she was talking about something we had just talked about or whatever. And so then she went on to recall that, and she says, do you remember what I said to you? And I said, yeah, I remember. And she burst into tears, and she said, I had no idea. I just really didn't get it. I'm so sorry. But she said, I didn't know what else to say. And so I'm hoping that maybe I can give you some ideas on some things that you could say or do that would be more appropriate. Okay. The first thing you have to do is know your own response. So if this is your friend whose grandma just died, and your grandma died very recently, and your grandma was the light of your life, and you know that just saying the word grandma is going to put you over the edge, you might want to be very careful as to how you approach it. So you have to know your own response to the grief that you're facing. When someone says to me, what would you like me to say to you? I would like you to just say his name. And that's probably the thing that will make me cry the most, is that I love to talk about him. I miss him, loved him. It's been 1996, it'll be 16 years. There's not a day goes by. But for someone just to walk up and say to me, like, I heard your son died. What was his name? And I get to say his name. That's all I want to do is say his name. And that's so special to me, because I don't want to forget him. I just don't want to forget him. And so I would encourage you that if you know someone who is experiencing anything like that, to be able to say to them, what was his name? What was her name? And then kind of go from there. Look, you can't make me cry, really. The pain that's in my heart because of him not being here, you didn't put there. And by you opening that door, it's not, now this is for me, and I do have to say it's for me. You will meet some people who don't want to talk about it at all, and you probably would know those people. But you know what? If you take the chance and somebody goes like, look, I don't want to talk about it, or it's not your business, or whatever, and you can say, I'm really sorry, and walk away. But at least you made the you made the effort to do that. And to acknowledge the loss, gosh, it must really hurt. Even 16 years later, it still really hurts sometimes. It just really does. Grief and mourning are unpredictable. Okay, so here's my story. I do really stupid things sometimes, okay? So about 3 years after Greg had died, I was shopping with my girlfriend at Target, and she needed to buy a clock radio. And so we were looking for somebody to help her because she had some questions. So I started looking for somebody, you're looking down the aisles for these people that work there that could help you. I finally saw this kid. I kind of looked down the aisle, and there's this kid, and I was like, oh my God, he has hair just like Greg's. And then I had this thing where I had to touch it. Okay? I just knew I had to touch it. And so I started planning. Like, how can I touch this kid's hair? Okay, because it's really unpredictable. Okay, I'm telling you, there is no way I could have walked out of that store without touching that kid's head. I don't know what it was. So, so I asked, could you help us? And he says, yeah. And he comes over, and so I'm like, wow, how long have you worked here? And he's like talking to me and to her, and I said, wow, I'm really glad that you could help us. And I'm kind of getting closer. I'm making my plan when I'm going to touch his hair, because I just had to touch that hair. And so I said something about, was he a high school student? Did he go to school somewhere? And he said, yeah. And I said, so where do you go? And he was talking to me. And I said, wow, I really like your hair. Who cuts it? And I kind of went like that. And he was like, by that time, he already thought I was weird. But he was okay with it, really, by that time. And I was like, phew, okay, I'm done. I'm fine. But it was so unpredictable. Nobody ever could have told me that that's what was going to happen, So people really do strange things to you sometimes. You may not ever know. I'm sure this kid never knows. And I'm sure if I had said to him, yeah, you have hair just like my dead son. Do you mind if I touch it? That probably wouldn't have gone over very well, So I just kind of had to do it my own way. So, remember that morning has no timetable. The first year was bad for me. The second year was beyond hell. It was beyond hell. And if anybody had told me that the first year, I thought the first year was hell. I couldn't imagine getting through the second year if I had known that. But everybody I have talked to who's lost a child says the second year is worse than the first. And by that time, a lot of people are like, haven't you moved on by now? Or aren't you getting over it a little bit better? But for some reason, for a lot of parents, the second year is just the worst, and I don't know why. You can't take away the pain. You don't have the answers. You can listen and nod your head. That's all you have to do is listen. A lot of times you would just start a conversation and they'll talk. Appropriate touch can be very comforting. Don't be afraid of tears. Acknowledge your own personal experiences carefully. There's probably nothing that that makes some people madder than if I would say, if somebody would come up to me and say, oh, I heard you lost your son. And I say, yeah. And then they say, well, tell me a little bit about him. And so I start to talk, and they go, well, yeah. And then my cousin died too, and la 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 la. Oh, I thought we were talking about me here. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you want to talk about you? That's fine. Okay. Some people they don't really like that. Sometimes honoring a loss in a meaningful way. I just called onto the radio show a few weeks ago about this, actually. They were talking about wonderful teachers. My son had one really, really favorite teacher in high school that he loved, Mr. Merchant. And Mr. Merchant retired. Do you know Mr. Merchant? Okay. She's gonna cry. Okay, so Mr. Merchant retired, and when Mr. Merchant retired, he was cleaning out one of his closets, and he found a paper that my son had written many years before that, probably like 5 or 6 years before that. Now, it would have been very easy for Mr. Merchant to pitch that paper, but he took the time to look up my address, put that paper in an envelope, and mail it to me. And I got this envelope from the high school one day, and I opened it up, and inside was my son's handwriting on a paper that I had not seen for I can't even tell you how long. And just to see his handwriting and knew that he had touched that paper, and Mr. Merchant had taken the time to be so kind. I mean, what a wonderful teacher he was. What a gift. So he honored my loss. Instead of thinking, oh, I don't want to send this to her, it'll upset her, he took the chance and he sent that to me. And I cannot tell you how much that has meant to me. It's just amazing. Everybody's unique. Remember the firsts and special occasions. Okay, so, what time is it? Okay, we got about 10 more minutes. Okay, so, I have really tried to follow Niemeyer's theory in terms of recreating my relationship with Greg. And so I like to do this kind of thing so that people can learn a little bit about him and that they can maybe be a better person in terms of working with people who are experiencing grief and loss and in your own life. And so I have to recreate my relationship with him. And so he's not here for me to be his mother now. And so I think, well, how can I, in his honor or in his memory, how can I create that relationship between the two of us with him not here? And so there are a couple things I do. The first thing I do is when I had him cremated, we had my sister was a potter at the time. She threw pots, you know, on the wheel. And so we got ready to bury his ashes, and they wouldn't all fit in the pot. And this was so like Greg. Nothing ever worked right for this kid, you know. If it could go wrong, it always went wrong for him. And so we couldn't get all of his ashes in there, and I was like, well, we'll put in what we can and figure out what to do with the rest. So we put in, you know, what we could, and buried those, and then I still have some with me. I still have some that I have access to. And so I have a necklace that I usually wear. I didn't wear it today, but I do have a necklace with some of his ashes in it, and all of the members of my family have one. So my, you know, Katie has one, so she gets to take her brother wherever she wants to go. And then I decided that because his life was struck down so young, that he didn't get to go to a lot of places that I think he should have gotten to go to. So when I go places that he's never been, I take his ashes with me, and I sprinkle his ashes wherever I go. So underneath the middle of the Golden Gate Bridge, under a big sign that said, under penalty of law, do not throw anything over the edge of this bridge. I threw him over the edge of the Golden Gate Bridge with the camera on me. Okay, I didn't get arrested. He's been to the top of the Grand Canyon and the bottom of the Grand Canyon. He was thrown over Victorian Falls in Africa by my sister when she went on vacation. For his 30th birthday, we took him to Italy, and we got to spread his ashes on the path where my grandparents met and walked in the early 1900s. He has been so many places. Oh yeah, and 2 years ago, no, last year, when I was in San Antonio, it was the Day of the Dead. And you know those Spanish people, they love to celebrate the Day of the Dead. And so I was driving by this cemetery, and I looked at this cemetery, and there were banners and balloons and all of these things, all of these different colors. It was just amazing. So I parked the car and I got out and I was walking along through this cemetery, and they had a lot of pictures of the people who had been buried there. And I found this really cute girl who was 19, and I thought, ooh, he'd like to be here. And so I scattered his ashes on the grave of this girl who was really pretty, and she was 19. And so he's been all different kinds of places. So that's kind of how I have created this relationship with my son now. And the other thing I do is, because his life was kind of in upheaval a lot of times, I like to find people who are similar to him that remind me of him, and then I do things for them. So one day I was at Blockbuster checking out, and there was this kid. You know how they have like that long, have you guys been in there ever? Yeah. Okay, well they have like a cash register and a cash register all side by side. So I was standing there, and this kid with his girlfriend was standing next to us. And for some reason he just reminded me of Greg, and I said, I would like to pay for their movies too. And the girl that was waiting on me said, really? And I said, yeah, I'll take theirs, you know, I'll just put their tab on mine. And so she said, okay. Well, just at that time, the guy that was ringing him up realized that he had a $20 overdue fine. Now that is so Greg. That was so Greg. And so she said, well, it's like, you know, $29 or $32 for him or whatever it was. And I said, I don't care. That's fine. Put it on mine. I'm fine with that. And so the girlfriend looks at the boyfriend and says, who's that woman? And he says, I don't know. And I said, don't worry about it. It's a long story. And so then they went out like, who's that woman? Who's that woman? Why is she doing that? Why is she paying for your stuff? And but I just was like, you know what? If Greg was here, I would have rented a movie for him. And now somebody, you know, will maybe go do a kind thing for somebody else. So I tend to do that a lot. Sometimes down in the cafeteria, I'll buy people's lunch, and they never know why. Or I bought stuff. I've overheard people say they want something, and then it's usually somebody that I kind of know, and then I'll buy it and I'll send it to them, and anonymously, and they don't know where it came from, and so that's the kind of stuff I do. So, all right. So this is my final little story for you. I don't know, gosh, it's been a while ago. My dad growing up, or my brother growing up, liked llamas. He got a llama for a graduation gift from high school. It was kind of a gag. Then my dad got horses. My brother was real involved with horses, and so we had a farm in our family, and my brother lived on that farm, and the kids, all the grandkids, you know, they grew up on the tractor with Grandpa, and they fed the horses, and they rode the horses, and they fed the llamas, and they dressed the llamas up for the parades in Westerville, and you know, so they all were kind of involved in the farm. And my parents decided to sell the farm, and so it was kind of a sad time for us because we had a lot of memories on the farm. And so one day I was driving home from school here, and I had the radio off, as I frequently do, just to have a little peace in my life, and to listen to see if anybody's talking to me, because they really do talk to you. I heard my son say to me, go to the farm and take a picture of the full moon. And this was in October, and I knew there was going to be a full moon that night, and Greg loved October. That was his favorite time of the month. He loved Halloween. And so, and he knows I'm a little budding photographer, so I thought, okay, I'll go. So I got home and I got my cameras and I went out to the farm, and I'm standing there waiting for the big moon to come up so I could get a silhouette of the llama, and I had it all planned in my head, of, you know, the llama with the moon in the background and everything. And so as I'm standing there waiting for the moon to come up and the sun to go down, I happened to turn around and look at the sunset behind me. And in the sunset, I see like these wonderful clouds, okay, that are, I mean, the sky was like just on fire. And so I thought, well, I wonder what that would look like reflected in the pond. So I run around the pond, climb over the fence, get down on my hands and knees. And I'm taking these pictures, and all of a sudden, I hear Greg say, and I look, and there's a horse running through the sky. Here's his mane, here's his tail, here's his body, and there's that horse. And I look at the reflection in the water, and it's a llama. Here's his head, here's his ears, here's his body, and here's his tail. And if you turn it upside down, you can see them both there, the llamas and the horse that are on the farm. Okay, so you can imagine, I burst into tears. I'm like, oh my God, now this is pre-digital camera time. I'm like clicking, wondering, did I get it, did I get it, did I get it? And so I go running over to Cord Camera, drop the film off. I said, I'll wait. No, you have to come back tomorrow. Damn it. So I wait till the next day. I go back and I look at the pictures, and I see that I actually had captured it. And it was, you know, when Greg was a little boy, we used to lay on the grass and look at the clouds and make animals out of the clouds. And so anybody who says that they aren't there talking to us, if we would just take the time to listen. And so I know he's okay. I really do. I know he's okay. So, and on that note, are you guys okay? So, questions? No. She says no. So that's why that's in my office, because I can think of him and remember him. Okay. So, oh, happy day. Class is over. Okay. Any questions? All right, what do you guys want to know about interpreting for this?
Are there